They were just two children, Noah and Lilah, laughing under the summer sun during a family picnic near the forest. One moment they were chasing butterflies, the next, gone. No screams, no trail. Just the deafening silence of trees holding secrets too heavy for words. For 13 long years, their disappearance became a cold case, until a single drawing surfaced, and with it, a truth far more terrifying than anyone imagined. In this chilling real-life mystery, we follow a mother's relentless journey through loss, deception, and the unthinkable revelation hidden behind a trusted face. What happened to Noah? Why did Lilah forget who she was? And how did a child's forgotten map expose a nightmare no one saw coming? Before we begin, if you're drawn to stories that uncover the darkest corners of the human heart and the strength that rises in the face of darkness, subscribe to Nest Soul. Here, every story is more than a tale. It's a mirror to what we fear, what we hope, and what we overcome. Now, let's begin. The sun hung low over Cascade Lake, casting long golden shadows through the towering pines, and the air carried that rare, delicate stillness only found deep in the Oregon wilderness. It was the kind of late summer day that felt suspended in time, warm, windless, and so quiet you could hear the insects stitching the air together. On a wide patch of grass, just a short walk from the Reed family's cabin, a checkered blanket had been spread beneath the swaying limbs of a sugar maple. Sandwiches, juice boxes, and a thermos full of lemonade shared space with open picture books and a slightly deflated beach ball. Nearby, two children played, unaware that this perfect afternoon would fracture their lives and their family forever. Noah Reed was 7, full of bold curiosity and protective instincts far beyond his age. His little sister Lilah was 4, delicate and whimsical, with a lopsided braid and a plastic tiara she refused to take off. The two had spent the afternoon constructing imaginary castles out of driftwood and giggling as they tossed pine cones into the lake to feed the sea monsters. Every few minutes, Noah would glance back at the picnic blanket to make sure their parents were still watching. Elliot and Joanna Reed were doing just that, lounging together, sipping iced tea from reusable mugs, occasionally calling out to remind them to stay close. "We should start packing up before the bugs come out," Joanna said, brushing crumbs off her lap. "It'll be dark in an hour." Elliot nodded, rising to gather the food containers. They moved in sync, familiar, practiced, relaxed. It was just a few trips to the SUV parked a short trail away. The kids were safe, within view, always had been. Oh, the forest was their playground, their summer sanctuary. It took less than 10 minutes, maybe 12, Joanna would later insist. She was sure of it. One load of supplies, then a cooler, a brief pause to chase down a runaway napkin. When they returned with the last of the items, the blanket was empty. At first, they thought the children had wandered just beyond the trees, chasing dragonflies or exploring the boulder path near the creek. "Noah? Lilah?" Elliot called. No response. Joanna tried next, a bit louder. "Kids, time to go." Silence again. Panic set in slowly, then all at once. The Reeds split up, shouting names into the shadows, darting through bushes, hearts pounding with every unanswered call. Minutes stretched into an hour. A park ranger was flagged down. Search parties were assembled by nightfall. Floodlights combed the lakeshore while dogs sniffed the underbrush. Volunteers from neighboring counties joined within 24 hours. Drones scanned the treetops. Boats glided silently across the still water, hoping for any clue. Nothing. Not a scrap of clothing, not a footprint. The children had vanished, as if swallowed by the forest itself. For weeks, the family cabin stood like a silent witness to a tragedy it could not explain. Police officers came and went. Reporters gathered, then faded. Psychics called with wild theories. Stranger danger pamphlets circulated again. But every trail led to a dead end. The only constant was Joanna's refusal to give up. Each morning she combed the lake's edge herself, eyes red from sleepless nights, clutching a stuffed animal she couldn't bear to throw away. She blamed herself. Of course she did. So did Elliot, though he never said it aloud. A single lapse, one small moment. The space between loading sandwiches and walking back. That's all it had taken to erase two children from the face of the earth. Time moved on without them. The cabin was boarded up. The picnic blanket folded and stored away like a cursed relic. Lilah and Noah's faces faded from the news cycles, replaced by newer tragedies. But for Joanna and Elliot, time didn't heal. It calcified. Every birthday passed with an untouched cake, every holiday with 2 unopened gifts, and every night Joanna dreamed of a little girl in a tiara running just out of reach through endless trees, always laughing, never looking back. 13 years passed. Then one morning, the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, the hour unsettling, just after dawn, when the sky still wore its first hint of blue. Joanna was standing in the kitchen, coffee halfway to her lips, when the vibration on the counter sent a tremor through her chest. She stared at the screen, her breath shortened. Something in her gut whispered danger, or hope, or both. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Mrs. Reed?" a voice asked. Male, measured. "This is Detective Caleb Rourke, Oregon State Police. I need you to come to the station. We've found something related to your children's case." The mug slipped from her hand, shattering against the tile floor. The sound echoed like gunfire. Elliot appeared in the doorway, face already pale. Joanna met his eyes, and he understood. After all these years, they didn't need words. Something had broken the silence. And with it, the past was clawing its way back from the trees. The drive to the station took 2 hours, but to Joanna, it felt suspended in a warped limbo where time both dragged and collapsed. Every pine tree blurred into the next, each curve of the winding road through Cascade Range, whispering memories she'd tried for over a decade to suppress. Elliot gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled tension, saying little, his jaw clenched like a dam against the rising tide inside him. The silence between them was not cold, but sacred. Anything spoken aloud might shatter the fragile barrier holding back their worst fears. At the Forest County Police Department, the station's modern exterior, gleaming glass and steel, seemed absurdly out of place for what was happening. A young officer greeted them at the door and led them through a hallway that smelled faintly of coffee and antiseptic. Detective Caleb Rourke was waiting, tall, broad-shouldered, with a trimmed beard and eyes that carried the weight of someone who'd had to deliver bad news far too many times. He nodded solemnly. "Mr. and Mrs. Reed, please come with me." He led them to a windowless room, a rectangular table, 3 chairs. A manila folder lay unopened on its surface. The detective gestured for them to sit, then joined them with a careful stillness, as if he were approaching a wounded animal that might bolt at any moment. Joanna didn't sit. She stared at the folder. "You said you found something?" she asked, her voice as tight as fishing wire. Rourke opened the folder slowly. 3 days ago, a man named Eric Renshaw, he runs a treasure hunting vlog, was hiking in the old section of Cascade State Park. He had his metal detector with him, shooting footage for his channel. He picked up a strong signal beneath a large oak tree just off the ridge trail. He slid a photo across the table, a digital readout glowing red, 98. "That's nearly the strongest reading possible," Rourke said. Eric thought he'd found coins, maybe an old ammo box. He started digging. Joanna could already feel it, a chill spreading from her spine outward. She didn't need to hear the rest. "What he found wasn't treasure," Rourke said, his voice dropping. He opened a clear evidence bag and carefully placed it on the table. Inside was a child-sized blue backpack, faded, torn, the zipper half rusted. Dangling from one strap was a keychain, a small green dinosaur, its smile still intact beneath years of dirt. Joanna's knees gave out. Elliot caught her before she hit the floor and helped her into the chair. She couldn't take her eyes off the dinosaur. "That's Noah's," she whispered. "I'm sorry," Rourke said gently. "Dental records confirm the remains found at the site belong to your son. We've also recovered pieces of fabric consistent with the shirt he was wearing that day. It appears he was buried deliberately, carefully, wrapped in a plastic tarp, shallow grave beneath heavy roots." Elliot sat motionless, lips slightly parted. His eyes were dry but glassy, like something inside him had cracked too deep to reach. Joanna reached for the bag, fingers trembling against the plastic. She didn't care that she shouldn't touch it. She had to hold some piece of her son, even if only through a layer of cold, sterile barrier. "We had always hoped," she began, but the words broke apart. "I know," Rourke said, sitting forward, "which is why you need to understand something. There was only one set of remains. We found no trace of Lilah." Joanna looked up. "Nothing?" Rourke shook his head. "Not a hair, not a thread, no evidence she was ever there. And that changes everything." He paused, then said, "This is no longer a missing persons case. It's a homicide investigation, and potentially, if Lilah is alive, a kidnapping case. The word kidnapping lodged in Joanna's throat like a shard of glass. She hadn't heard it used in years. Back then it was a possibility. Then it became a fantasy, a coping mechanism. Now it was back with fangs. "We're reopening everything," Rourke said. "All files, all interviews. We'll be bringing in everyone who was at the cabin that week, everyone who had access. It's possible, likely, that whoever did this knew your family, knew the routines, knew how to avoid being caught." Joanna thought back to that day, how ordinary it had seemed, how brief the moment was when they lost sight of their kids. She remembered the comfort of familiar faces at the picnic, their neighbor Deb, the park ranger on duty, and of course, her heart stopped. "Matt?" she whispered. Rourke tilted his head. "I'm sorry." "Matt Halden," she said. "My husband's best friend. He was with us that weekend. He lived with us for a few months after his divorce. The kids adored him." Elliot blinked. "Joe, he couldn't—" "Couldn't?" Joanna snapped. "You remember how good he was with Lilah? How he'd carry her on his shoulders? You remember how Noah started pulling away from him? How he'd insist on sleeping with the door locked? And we thought it was just a phase." Elliot said nothing. His silence was not denial. It was memory crashing down like falling bricks. "We'll look into him," Rourke said evenly, discreetly. "Right now, I need you both to stay in the area. Do you still own the cabin?" Joanna nodded slowly. "We never sold it." "Then I'd like you to go back, spend some time there, walk through the memories. Sometimes something clicks, something that seemed insignificant before becomes vital. Back to the cabin, to the place where the earth swallowed her children." Joanna rose slowly. "We'll go today." She picked up the evidence bag with trembling reverence, holding it like an offering. The dinosaur keychain swung slightly as she stood. "We're going to find her," Rourke said. Joanna didn't look back as she walked out of the room. She wasn't sure what was worse, the fact that her son had been found, or the haunting possibility that her daughter was still out there, alive, somewhere, waiting. The gravel cracked beneath the tires as their SUV crept up the winding forest road, each curve familiar and foreign all at once. The trees stood taller now, thicker, more impenetrable, as if the woods had grown teeth in their absence. Joanna stared through the windshield as the cabin emerged from behind the curtain of pines, a weathered monument to the life they had left behind. The wraparound porch sagged slightly at the edges, and the once white siding had dulled to a grayish memory of what it used to be. Yet, everything, down to the wind chime clinking weakly by the front door, looked exactly as it had 13 years ago. Elliot cut the engine, and the silence that followed felt like a scream held underwater. Neither of them moved. Joanna reached for the door handle but paused. The air felt thicker here, heavier, as though the very soil remembered what they were about to relive. "You don't have to go in," Elliot said quietly. She turned to him, her voice dry. "I do." The door groaned as she pushed it open, the hinges stiff from disuse. A wave of musty air hit her face. Damp wood, old fabric, dust, and something harder to name. Absence. Inside, the house was a frozen tableau. A board game still sat half-played on the coffee table. One of Lilah's tiny shoes lay forgotten beneath the couch. On the mantel, a row of framed photographs hadn't moved. Noah missing his front teeth, Lilah wearing bunny ears, the four of them at the lake, sunlit and unsuspecting. Joanna walked slowly through the space like a ghost in her own past, her fingertips grazing surfaces she used to clean, decorations she once arranged with care. In the kitchen, the magnet still held up Emma's crayon drawings, stick figures labeled Mama, Dada, and Me plus Noah. One drawing showed the cabin with giant flowers and a beaming sun, the kind of simple joy that only small children know. Joanna pressed her fingers to it, tracing the waxy lines with shaking hands. Upstairs, the children's room remained untouched, twin beds with cartoon sheets, a bookshelf full of bedtime stories. On Noah's nightstand sat the alarm clock he never learned to set properly. Everything exactly as they'd left it, as though time had merely paused, not abandoned them entirely. Elliot appeared in the doorway behind her. "Rourke said they're starting grid searches tomorrow. They'll set up command at the ranger station." She nodded, distracted, her eyes locked on Noah's bed. "Do you remember when he used to sleep with that baseball bat?" "He said it made him brave," Elliot replied, a smile flickering and dying in an instant. "He knew," Joanna said suddenly. "He knew something. Maybe not what, but he felt it. We thought he was just anxious. Her breath caught. What if that wasn't a phase? Elliot stepped into the room, placing a hand on her back. Let's not do this to ourselves, not yet. But Joanna was already somewhere else, spiraling backward in time, collecting fragments. Noah's unease, Lilah's sudden attachment to Matt, the way the man would insist on tucking them in even when Elliot or she already had. We trusted him, she murmured. He lived in our house. He sat at this table, ate our food, hugged our children. Elliot didn't argue. Outside, a branch snapped. Joanna stiffened. She turned toward the window. Beyond the trees, a figure in Ranger green moved across the forest line, holding a map. Park Ranger Eric Dunham. Joanna recognized the name from a flyer. He was leading tomorrow's search teams. As he walked, another figure emerged near him, taller, bulkier. Joanna squinted. The second man moved with assertiveness, gesturing toward the north quadrant of the forest. She couldn't see his face clearly, but there was something unsettling about the way he moved. Controlled. Overly familiar. Joanna hurried downstairs and out the front door. "Ranger Dunham?" she called. The two men turned. Dunham raised a hand. "Mrs. Reed, just plotting tomorrow's routes." "And your friend?" she asked, coming closer. The second man stepped forward. "Matt Halden," he said, smiling tightly. "Elliot told me you were back. I wanted to help." Joanna's breath stopped. The last time she'd seen Matt, he was at Noah and Lilah's 5th memorial vigil, standing beside the other mourners like a statue carved from grief. Now, 13 years later, he looked older, but unchanged in the ways that mattered. Same careful posture, same eyes that always looked too long, as if measuring something invisible. "We weren't expecting you," Joanna said. "Well, I saw the news," Matt replied smoothly. "Wanted to offer whatever I could. I know the terrain, remember? And the kids, they were like family." His voice faltered just enough to seem sincere. Joanna nodded slowly. "You're focusing on the North Ridge?" "Difficult terrain," Dunham interjected. "Steep, unstable, not ideal for civilians." "But familiar to him," Joanna said, staring directly at Matt. "I'm surprised you haven't suggested we check there." Something passed through Matt's eyes then, just a flicker, a tightening. "We'll get to every area," he said. "Eventually." Joanna stepped closer. "Eventually might be too late." He smiled again, thinner now. "You always were the determined one." Dunham excused himself with a nod and disappeared down the slope. Joanna and Matt stood in silence until Elliot emerged from the cabin. "Matt?" he asked, clearly startled. "Didn't expect to see you here." Matt turned with a practiced laugh. "Just lending a hand, like old times." Elliot hesitated, then walked down the steps. "Thanks for that." Joanna didn't speak. Her eyes remained on Matt as he moved toward his car, a dark SUV she hadn't noticed earlier, parked just off the dirt road. He climbed in, gave a small wave, and drove away. Joanna stood rooted until the sound of the engine faded. "He knew," she said at last. Elliot turned to her. "Who?" "Noah. And now I do too." The pines swayed around them like they were holding their breath. Something was buried in this forest. And it wasn't just Noah. That night, the forest wrapped itself around the cabin like a second skin. Joanna sat by the window in what had once been the children's playroom, now overtaken by boxes, memories, and silence. Outside, moonlight filtered through the tall pines, painting soft silver patterns on the dirt road that wound past the property. Elliot had gone to bed hours ago, exhausted by the emotional weight of the day, but Joanna couldn't close her eyes. Her mind kept retracing every moment of the afternoon. Matt's voice, the forced smile, the subtle way his eyes had darted toward the north quadrant when Dunham wasn't looking. She sipped lukewarm coffee and opened her laptop, its cracked lid still decorated with faded stickers Lilah had once stuck on. Maybe it was desperation, or just the quiet madness that came from revisiting the place where your world had unraveled. But she found herself scrolling again through the video, the TikTok that had first cracked the surface of denial. It had appeared in a random true crime subreddit, reposted from a hiking account with only a few hundred followers. She had almost skipped past it, but the girl on screen, barefoot, hair tangled in a single braid, had stopped her heart. The video began shakily, filmed by a young man who had clearly stumbled upon something unexpected during a camping trip. He narrated in a hushed voice, "Came across this girl and an older man near the Cascade foothills. They said they were off-grid, but it was weird. The girl barely talked. She kept looking at the man before answering. like asking permission. The camera zoomed in, grainy and unfocused, but Joanna had frozen when the girl turned slightly. Her face. The way she stood, angled slightly to the left, her fingers twisted nervously at the hem of her oversized sweater. Joanna had stared at the screen until tears blurred the pixels. There was no mistaking it. That was Lilah, not a memory, not a child in a photograph. A young woman, older now, altered by time and circumstance, but still her daughter. Alive. Joanna played the video again and again. The voice of the man behind the camera, laughing awkwardly. They didn't want to talk much. She said her name was Ellie, or maybe Lily? Not sure. I don't think she was allowed to say more. Then a shift in the angle. The girl glanced toward the man beside her, a bearded figure in a flannel jacket standing just beyond the edge of focus. The way he stood close. Too close. The way the girl flinched when he moved. Joanna paused the frame. She leaned in until her nose nearly touched the screen. The man's hand rested lightly on the girl's shoulder. Possessive. Controlling. Familiar. Matt. She felt it like a scream trapped in her throat. The way the man's stance mirrored how Matt used to place his hand on Lilah's shoulder when she was 4, when she stood quietly in the kitchen holding a spoon and watching him cook. But there was something else, too. In the background of the video, barely visible behind the two figures, was a structure, stone or concrete, half hidden beneath overgrown vines. Not a house, not a shed. Something bunker-like, industrial. It sent a wave of nausea rolling through Joanna. She took a screenshot and enhanced the image using every basic editing tool she knew. The outline became slightly clearer. A square entryway, reinforced with what looked like rusted metal, and behind it, darkness. Her hands shaking, Joanna opened a new browser tab and searched Abandoned Bunkers, Cascade National Forest. Dozens of hits came up. Old fallout shelters from the 1960s, unused fire lookout posts, collapsed mining tunnels, even a few Cold War-era doomsday hideouts. She clicked through, narrowing by region, by coordinates, by terrain. Then, buried in an old forum post from a survivalist thread, she found it. Croswell Bunker, southeast quadrant, private land, decommissioned in 1971. Cement-reinforced storm shelter with single entry, padlocked, supposedly sealed. It was less than 2 miles from the North Quadrant search zone Matt had been so eager to avoid. Joanna's pulse thundered in her ears. The clues had been there all along, but grief had buried them beneath a weight too heavy to lift. Until now. She copied the coordinates and messaged them to Detective Rourke with a note. "This is where he took her, I'm sure of it." Her phone buzzed within minutes. A message from Rourke. Where did this footage come from? Joanna didn't answer. She couldn't. Not yet. Instead, she saved the video again to her phone, transferred the images to a flash drive, and backed everything up. Then she stood, feeling the creak of the cabin beneath her feet. In the stillness of the night, she heard something. Rustling. Soft, methodical, just beyond the tree line. She crept to the window again. A flashlight beam flicked briefly through the dark. A silhouette moved between the trees, large, male, moving slowly, deliberately, like someone surveying, not lost. Matt. She didn't need proof. Her soul screamed it was him. She backed away from the window, heart pounding. Her daughter was alive. Her son was gone. And the man they had once called family had taken everything from them, except the truth. And now, finally, she was going to take it back. Dot by dawn, the ranger station transformed into a hive of movement. Folding tables were covered with grid maps, radio equipment, thermoses of bad coffee, and stacks of printed missing person flyers, most yellowed and curling at the corners. Joanna stepped through the door just as volunteers were being briefed for the first wave of the expanded search. Her eyes swept the room until they found him. Detective Rourke, hunched over a large topographic map, marking sectors with red grease pencil. He looked up, met her gaze, and straightened, nodding for her to approach. "You didn't sleep," he said without judgment. "Neither did I," she replied. Without preamble, she slid a printed image across the table, an enhanced frame from the video. "This is the entrance I told you about. Croswell Bunker. That's what's behind her." Rourke studied the image, then nodded slowly. "It lines up with some of the older forest infrastructure we've had flagged. The problem is..." He stopped, glancing around, then leaned in. "That land is technically private, owned by an LLC connected to a long-defunct mining company. No one's bothered to patrol it for decades. So he used it, Joanna whispered. Matt. He knew it was there. We're applying for emergency access under probable cause, Rourke continued. But we'll have to be careful. If she's really in there, if he's still using it, we can't risk tipping him off. Joanna opened her mouth to respond, but something across the room caught her attention. A familiar voice. Too smooth. Too rehearsed. We should avoid the southeast ridgeline, Matt Halden said, gesturing across a map as he spoke to two eager young volunteers. Old mining shafts, unstable footing, not safe for civilian searchers. Joanna's breath turned to ice. He was here, again, playing the helpful neighbor, offering advice, steering them away from the very area she was now certain hid the truth. She walked toward him, each step measured like she was walking across thin glass. "Morning, Matt," she said, letting her voice stay calm, controlled. He turned, clearly startled, but recovered fast. "Joanna, you're up early. Thought you and Elliot were staying back today." "Couldn't sleep," she said. "Too many memories in that place." His eyes flicked downward for a moment. "Yeah, I can imagine." Then, "Did you see the sectors I flagged? I told Dunham it'd be best to focus west today. Safer terrain." "Interesting," she replied. "I actually think we should focus southeast." His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes froze, like a muscle flinching too fast to hide. "Southeast?" he said casually. "That area hasn't been maintained for years." "Exactly," she said, "which makes it the perfect place to hide something, or someone." A tense silence followed. Matt broke it with a short laugh. "Still chasing ghosts, huh?" "Not ghosts," Joanna said softly. "Just unfinished stories." Before he could respond, Detective Rourke approached with two uniformed officers. "Mr. Halden," he said smoothly, "I understand you've been assisting with organizing the volunteer routes." "Trying to help," Matt said with a quick nod. "Good," Rourke said. "Then you won't mind answering a few questions about your time at the Reed cabin. 13 years ago, just to clarify timelines." "Happy to cooperate," Matt said, but his jaw tightened, just barely. Rourke gestured toward a side room. "It'll only take a few minutes." As the officers led him away, Joanna exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. She turned to Rourke. "He'll lie." "We expect that," Rourke said, "but lies crack faster when you already know the truth." Hours passed in a blur of terrain boots, walkie-talkie chatter, and the low thrum of helicopter rotors overhead. Joanna remained at base camp, studying the search maps, memorizing elevation markers, marking off locations already covered. Then, just after noon, a call came through the main radio channel. "Found something, south of grid C6. Fresh footprints, multiple." Joanna grabbed the receiver. "Size?" "One adult male, one smaller, barefoot, female. Not animal. Too clean." Rourke turned from across the room, eyes sharp. "C6 is inside the Croswell parcel." Within minutes, a tactical team was mobilized. Drones were launched. The area was locked down. Joanna sat in the passenger seat of the lead vehicle, white-knuckling her seatbelt, heart racing with hope and dread in equal measure. They reached the southern trailhead 20 minutes later, vehicles grinding to a stop beneath a break in the canopy, where filtered light made the moss glow gold. Officers fanned out, rifles lowered but ready. And then, there it was, just as she had seen in the video. Set into a slope beneath tangled vines and thorn bushes stood a thick metal door, rusted around the hinges, its padlock freshly broken. The door stood ajar. "Clear to proceed," Rourke said into his mic. Joanna moved before anyone could stop her. Inside, the concrete bunker was silent. The smell hit her first. Mildew, old sweat, chemical disinfectant. Her footsteps echoed. To the left, a mattress on the floor, a teddy bear, a set of drawings, crude, childish, stick figures, and a girl with long hair. "Ellie," one was labeled. To the right, a small table, empty cans, plastic bottles, a folded blanket. No sign of life. But on the wall, scratched faintly into the cement with something sharp, were 4 letters. Lila. Joanna collapsed to her knees. She pressed her hand to the letters as if she could absorb the proof into her bones. Lilah had been here, her daughter, alive. Somewhere. But no longer inside this tomb. Behind her, Rourke's voice broke the silence. "He's moving her," he said grimly. "He knew we were getting close." Joanna stood slowly, eyes blazing with purpose. Then we need to be faster. Outside, the moss still held the imprint of bare feet, fresh, running, headed west. The hunt had truly begun. Dot. They followed the footprints west, through tangled undergrowth and waist-high ferns, their path lit only by slivers of sunlight that pierced the canopy like shards of fractured glass. The trail was fragile, nearly invisible to the untrained eye, but the officers moved with practiced precision, reading broken twigs, disturbed moss, and the faint impressions of bare soles in the loam. Joanna kept pace behind them, heart thrumming like an engine. Every step forward was a heartbeat closer to Lilah, or a second too late. The prince led through a dry creek bed, then up a ridge. Rourke raised a hand for silence as they reached a narrow clearing. Something had shifted. The forest here was too still. No birdsong, no breeze. Only the distant hum of cicadas and the ragged breath of the search team. On the edge of the clearing, just before the ground dipped into shadow again, one of the volunteers knelt down, motioning urgently. "A sock," he whispered, holding it up with gloved hands. Small, pink, frayed at the cuff. The kind a child would have worn 13 years ago, but fresh enough to have been dropped in the last day. Joanna's breath caught. "It's hers," she murmured. "Lilah used to wear those with sandals. She hated closed shoes." Rourke nodded, pulling out his radio. "We're closing in. Proceed with caution." They moved deeper into the woods until the trees closed around them like jaws. And then they saw it. An abandoned ranger station, long forgotten, the roof sagging under rotten time, hidden behind a thicket of brambles that nature had woven like a curtain. It wasn't marked on any recent map, but Joanna recognized it instantly. "They used to store emergency gear here," she whispered, "before the state cut funding." Inside, it smelled of mold and rust. Flashlights swept across overturned chairs, collapsed shelves, and a faded map still pinned to the wall. In the far corner, a mattress had been dragged across the floor. A blanket lay in a heap. And on the wall above it, written in smudged charcoal, was a sentence that froze Joanna's blood. "I hear her song sometimes." Joanna stumbled forward, hand trembling as she touched the words. Beneath them were faint drawings, circles, stars, and a figure with wild hair standing beside a tall, faceless shadow. "It's her," she whispered. "She's trying to remember." "She's leaving us messages," Rourke said, scanning the rest of the room. "She knows we're coming." Joanna turned to him, eyes wide. What if she's not just leaving a trail? What if she's trying to escape? Before he could answer, a crackle came through the radio. "Movement west of your position. One figure, small, fast, no visual on the second. Heading toward the fire watch tower." Rourke's expression shifted instantly. "The tower's still standing?" "Partially," came the reply. "Upper decks collapsed, but the lower levels are intact." Joanna felt her pulse slam in her chest. "She's going up," she said. "It's what Noah would have done. Higher ground, more visibility." "Or someone's leading her there," Rourke said grimly. The team mobilized again, pushing hard through the forest. The undergrowth tore at their clothes and branches whipped at their arms, but none of it mattered. Joanna could feel it. Lilah was close, and she was scared, but she was fighting, just like her mother. When they reached the fire watch tower, the stairs groaned with age, and moss crept up the stone foundation. Rourke and his team approached cautiously, guns drawn, radios low. Joanna remained back, heart clawing its way up her throat. She could hear her own breathing, the wind hissing through the rusted beams, the faint creak of movement above. Then, a scream, high, panicked, muffled. "Move!" Rourke barked. Officers surged into the tower, boots thundering on rotting wood. Joanna held her breath as time stretched unbearably. Then, shouts, pounding, something crashing. Another scream, followed by silence. She ran. Bursting through the doorway, she collided with a swirl of movement. Rourke was kneeling, arms wrapped around a shaking figure. A girl. Thin, pale, her hair tangled, eyes wide and wild. She wore an oversized flannel shirt and no shoes. Her arms were covered in faded bruises and scratches. She trembled like a leaf in a storm. "Lilah!" Joanna choked. The girl turned toward the sound of her name, flinching. Her gaze flicked to Rourke, then to the other officers, unsure, terrified. Her lips parted. Who are you?" Joanna stepped forward slowly. "It's me," she said softly. "Mama." The girl blinked. She looked no older than 12, though Joanna knew she was nearly 18. Her expression twisted. a flicker of something deep within, a recognition buried beneath years of lies. "Mama sings the bird song," she whispered. Joanna began to hum, the same lullaby, the same tune she had sung every night for 4 years until it was stolen from her. Lila's eyes widened, her breath hitched, her knees buckled. Joanna caught her, fell to her knees, clutching the broken body of her child, both of them trembling in the ruins of an old tower, surrounded by wind and time and the echo of 13 years. From the shadows behind them, an officer called, "We've got blood, leading west. Second suspect fled the tower before we breached. He's wounded." Joanna didn't care. Lilah was alive. Now they would find the rest. The forest swallowed sound the moment they left the tower, trees pressing in with a suffocating silence, broken only by the low crackle of radio static and the crunch of boots on damp soil, and above all of it, the only constant, a thin, wavering trail of blood weaving west through the undergrowth like a sinister thread pulled from the earth itself, and every drop screamed urgency. He was bleeding, desperate but not slowing, and that made him more dangerous than ever. Detective Rourke barked orders into the radio as his team fanned out, moving with a hunter's precision, flanking both sides of the ravine that curved toward the older service roads, while overhead, the sun was dipping behind the treetops, casting long shadows that turned every stump into a crouching figure, every boulder into a threat. And Joanna, though ordered to stay back, followed at a distance she knew was reckless, but she could not let go. Not now. Not when her daughter was safe, and the man who had destroyed their lives was within reach for the first time in 13 years. Not when the air still carried the echo of Lilah's voice asking, "Why did he run when I sang?" And that question burned in Joanna's chest like a brand, because she knew Matt had planned for this, had contingencies, exit routes, and probably caches hidden in the woods like an animal preparing for winter. But something had gone wrong, and now he was wounded and hunted and alone, and that gave them a sliver of an edge. Rourke held up a fist, signaling the team to halt near a split in the trail, where blood spattered across a moss-covered rock and continued in 2 directions. Left toward the deeper canyon, right along a ridge that led to an abandoned fire road, and he studied the sign for a long moment before gesturing right, whispering, "He knows we'd assume he'd go down. Wounded, he'd avoid steep climbs, but he's smarter than that." And Joanna felt her stomach turn because she knew Rourke was right. Matt was always 3 steps ahead, but now he was bleeding, and desperation made men sloppy. They pushed on, climbing the narrow path where leaves had recently been disturbed, and a broken tree limb leaned unnaturally low across the trail, snapped fresh, the bark still bleeding sap, and just beyond it, footprints smeared with red and a torn piece of flannel snagged on a thorn bush, fluttered in the breeze like a flag of surrender, and suddenly a shout rang out. "Movement ahead!" Horizontal, followed by the dull thud of someone stumbling through underbrush and the sharp rustle of branches, and the team surged forward, weapons raised, eyes scanning every shadow, until they reached the clearing with the old hunting blind, the one rotting in the trees like a forgotten watchtower. And there, slumped beneath it, arm cradled against his ribs, face streaked with dirt and blood, was Matt, trying to crawl towards something, a duffel bag half hidden beneath pine needles. "Hands where I can see them," an officer shouted, but Matt only turned his head slowly, his face twisted in something between fury and heartbreak, and he rasped, "You don't understand. I loved her." And Joanna stepped forward then, trembling but unflinching, her voice like ice. "You stole her." And Matt looked at her, eyes hollow, voice breaking as he said, "No one protected her like I did. You left her there. You were too busy. Noah was going to ruin it. He wouldn't stop watching me." And Rourke signaled 2 officers to move in. But Matt suddenly lunged for the bag, one final act of desperation, and the moment stretched impossibly long before a shot rang out. A single clean pop, and Matt crumpled like a puppet with its strings cut, falling face first into the dirt, the bag unopened. Officers swarmed in, confirming he was alive but unconscious, and as medics moved to stabilize him, Joanna stood frozen, staring at the crumpled man who had haunted her for over a decade, and her breath shook as she asked, "Is it over?" But Rourke, eyes still locked on the blood-streaked ground, answered, "Not yet. We need to know what else he's hiding." And as they restrained Matt and loaded him into the back of an ATV, Joanna found herself drawn to the duffel he'd nearly reached, and when the zipper was opened, inside, They found a burner phone, maps, cash, a passport under a false name, and, most chilling of all, a small locked notebook with names, dates, scribbled notes in frantic handwriting, and photos, dozens of them, printed on cheap paper, of Lilah at different ages, some recent, some clearly taken in secret, from behind glass, through the trees, all time-stamped, cataloged like research, and beneath them a photo of another girl, not Lilah, labeled next. And Rourke's jaw tightened as he muttered, "He was going to do it again." And suddenly it was clear that this wasn't just about Lilah or Noah anymore. It was about all the lives Matt could have destroyed. All the families that might have suffered the same fate if Joanna hadn't followed her instincts. If Lilah hadn't left those messages, if the lullaby hadn't cracked the cage around her mind. And Joanna felt her knees give slightly, the weight of it all pressing down. But Rourke steadied her with a hand and said softly, "You ended it." And she nodded. But deep inside, the fear still lingered, because trauma doesn't vanish with an arrest. And even though the monster had fallen, the ghosts would stay for a while longer, haunting memories, photographs, dreams. But now, at least they could begin to rebuild, because Lilah had survived, and justice was no longer a hope. It was real, and it had a name. And tonight, the trees no longer whispered lies. Dot. The hospital room was quiet but full, not with sound, but with the tension that clung to the air like fog, thick and unmoving. Machines beeped softly beside the bed, IV fluids dripping in rhythmic pulses, monitoring a body that had grown, but a mind still suspended somewhere between childhood and captivity. Lilah sat upright, back pressed against the pillows, her eyes vacant yet flickering with something just beyond reach. Joanna hadn't left her side in 16 hours. She had watched her daughter eat her first real meal, flinch at the touch of a nurse, recoil from the sound of running water. Every little movement, every odd hesitation, carried the heavy imprint of trauma, training, fear, silence. But there were cracks forming, thin, hairline fractures in the shell Matt had built around her. "Would you like to draw?" the therapist asked gently from a nearby chair. Lilah glanced toward the tray of crayons and paper, her fingers twitching slightly beneath the blanket. "I don't draw anymore," she said flatly, her voice strangely even. "Uncle said it made me noisy inside." Joanna swallowed the lump in her throat. "You used to love drawing," she said softly. "You would make suns with too many rays, and flowers that were bigger than trees." Lilah's eyes flicked to her, a shadow of something surfacing. "Did I?" "You did," Joanna smiled through tears. "And your brother would always add mustaches to them when you weren't looking." At that, Lilah blinked. Her lips parted slightly. "Brother." She said the word like it was foreign, forbidden. "Noah." The sound of his name in her mouth nearly crushed Joanna. "Yes, sweetheart. Noah. Do you remember him?" Lilah closed her eyes and for a long moment said nothing. Then, quietly, he used to hum, not loud, like a little bee. Her fingers began tapping a rhythm against the blanket. "He hummed when I cried. He held my hand." Joanna turned to the therapist, who gave a small, encouraging nod. Memory. It was happening. Carefully, delicately. "You're safe now," Joanna said gently. "He can't hurt you anymore." But Lilah's eyes snapped open at that. "Don't say that," she whispered. "He said if I stopped being good, they'd come. The others. The ones who take you away if you lie." Joanna reached out slowly and placed her hand over her daughter's. "No one's taking you away, Lilah. Not ever again." Lilah stared at their hands for a long moment before turning away, shoulders curling slightly. "Mama used to sing," she said, almost inaudibly, "a song about birds, mockingbirds and rings." Joanna's voice broke as she began to hum. Slow and low, the same lullaby she had sung every night when Lilah was little. The notes seemed to float between them, and for the first time, Lilah didn't flinch. She didn't move away. Her breathing slowed, her eyes filled. "That's it," she whispered. "That's the one." Later that afternoon, Detective Rourke arrived. He waited outside the room until the therapist gave the okay. Lilah watched him warily when he entered, shrinking into the blankets. "Hello, Lilah," he said gently, sitting a careful distance away. "I'm not here to ask anything hard today, just, can I show you something?" She said nothing, but didn't look away. He pulled out the small notebook they had recovered from the duffel, Matt's spiral journal of horrors, and set it on the table. He didn't open it. Not yet. "Do you know what this is?" Lila's expression didn't change, but Joanna saw it, her hands tightening, her pupils contracting, a pulse of recognition. "He wrote about everything, didn't he?" Rourke said gently. "When you woke up, when you slept, what you ate, what you were allowed to say." Lilah looked at him then, her jaw trembling. "He said if I ever told anyone, I'd vanish like the others." "Did you see other girls, Lilah?" Joanna asked gently. "Anyone else there?" Lilah's eyes clouded. "Just me," she said. "But there were pictures, faces. He said they were broken dolls, too loud, they didn't last." Rourke's face hardened, but he nodded. "Thank you. That helps more than you know." As he stood to leave, Lilah asked, Is he dead?" Joanna answered, "No, he's in jail, forever." Lilah looked down. "I thought he was going to take me into the trees again." "You're not going anywhere," Joanna said firmly. "You're home." That night, as the hospital dimmed and the nurses moved quietly through the halls, Joanna curled beside Lilah on the narrow bed. Her daughter hadn't spoken in hours, but her hand remained tangled in Joanna's shirt like an anchor. And then, just before sleep, Lilah whispered, "I remember the stars, that night, before he took us. Noah said he saw a comet." Joanna closed her eyes. "He did," she whispered back. "You made a wish." Lilah turned toward her, voice barely audible. "Do you think it came true?" Joanna brushed the hair from her daughter's forehead, her heart breaking and rebuilding in the same moment. "Yes," she said. "You're here. That's the wish." The interrogation room was cold and windowless, its walls painted in a dull institutional gray that seemed to sap the color from everything within it. But Detective Rourke didn't need light or comfort, only truth. And across from him sat the man who had stolen 13 years from a family, a man with fading bruises on his jaw and a bandage across his ribs, his wrists cuffed to the table, but his eyes calm, too calm. And it was that serenity that made Rourke's skin crawl, because it was the serenity of someone who believed he had already won something, preserved something, even in defeat. Matt Halden leaned forward slightly, fingers twitching against the cuffs, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low and smooth, almost conversational. "I know what you're thinking, Detective, that I'm a monster, a predator, a thief of innocence, but I want you to understand, really understand. I didn't take her. I rescued her." And Rourke remained silent, letting the words hang, letting the man fill the void, because men like Matt couldn't stand silence. They had to narrate, to justify, to control the narrative. And sure enough, Matt continued, his voice taking on a dreamy cadence. "Joanna was always distracted. Elliot never saw her, really saw her. But I did. I saw Lilah from the beginning, the way she watched everything, the way she listened. She needed someone who noticed. And Rourke finally spoke, slow and deliberate. "So you made yourself the center of her world." And Matt smiled faintly, as if accepting a compliment. "I became what she needed, someone constant, someone who didn't leave. And she thrived, Detective. She adapted. She loved our routines, the quiet, the structure." And Rourke leaned forward, eyes sharp. "She loved you because she was trained to, conditioned. You erased her identity, her voice, her memory of her family, and you killed her brother." But Matt didn't flinch, only tilted his head slightly. "Noah was difficult, stubborn. He wouldn't stop watching me. And I knew he'd tell. He'd ruin everything before it even began. So, yes, I handled it. But I was gentle. I gave him something to sleep. He didn't feel anything. He just drifted." And Rourke's stomach turned because of the way Matt said it, like describing a pet being put down. And still he showed no remorse, only a quiet satisfaction, a chilling pride in his control, his craft. And Rourke pressed on. "You documented everything. Why?" And Matt's eyes lit up slightly. "To remember? To track her growth, her cycles, her moods. How else could I ensure she stayed pure, untouched by the world's corruption?" And Rourke's hand curled into a fist under the table, forcing himself to stay measured. "And the other girls?" he asked, opening the notebook and flipping to the pages, marked Next. And Matt glanced at it, then away, his voice softening. "They were possibilities, contingencies. I never hurt them, I just watched, assessed. But none of them were like her." And Rourke's breath caught. "You were going to do it again." And for the first time, Matt's mask slipped. Just a flicker, a shadow behind his eyes. "Not anymore," he said, and Rourke pounced. "Why not? Because she aged out? Because she started remembering?" and Matt's hands clenched against the cuffs. She started changing, singing the song again, asking questions, dreaming about them, and he said them like a slur, like they were the invaders, the thieves. And Rourke whispered, "You couldn't control her anymore," and Matt's jaw tightened. "I protected her from everything. TV, the internet, boys, shame. I built her a world where she was safe." And Rourke spat, "You built her a prison." But Matt only shook his head. "You call it that because you don't understand. But she was never afraid of me. She trusted me. She called me daddy." And the word hung there like a sickness, and Rourke stood slowly, snapping the notebook shut, his voice low, final. "She calls you nothing now." And as he turned to leave, Matt called out, "She'll come back. You'll see, you can't erase what we had." And Rourke paused at the door, not turning around. "You erased her, and she's remembering now. And one day, when she speaks again, you'll be nothing but a name she survived." And then he left, closing the door on a man who thought he had won something, but now had only silence for company. The hospital room was cloaked in moonlight, pale beams slipping through the slatted blinds and painting narrow stripes across the sterile floor. And in that quiet hour, when even the machines seemed to breathe softer, Lilah stirred in her bed, her eyes flickering beneath closed lids, twitching with the rhythm of dreams, too jagged to be peaceful, but not sharp enough to wake her fully. And Joanna, seated beside her with one hand gently resting over her daughter's wrist, felt it first. The subtle shift in Lilah's breathing, the way her chest rose quicker, the tension blooming beneath her skin like an old fear returning. And when Lilah's lips began to move, murmuring fragments of words with no voice behind them, Joanna leaned closer, heart pounding as if afraid to interrupt whatever was happening inside her child's fragile mind. And then, without warning, Lilah's eyes snapped open, glassy and unfocused, staring past Joanna to the far wall, her entire body locked rigid, as if frozen by some invisible thread pulling her backward through time. And Joanna whispered gently, "It's okay, baby, I'm here." But Lilah didn't respond, only blinked once, twice, then whispered a name, so faint Joanna thought she imagined it. "Noah." And the sound of it spoken aloud was like a gunshot in that silent room. And Joanna's breath caught, her vision blurring as Lilah's gaze slowly turned to meet hers. Not blank this time, not distant, but filled with something new, something alive, raw, terrified. And then Lilah said, "He told me Noah went to heaven because he was bad." And the words poured out in a cascade, like a dam cracking under pressure. "He said if I asked about you, or daddy, or home, the others would take me away. That dreams were poison, that music would bring the monsters, and every time I hummed the bird song, he slapped the walls until I stopped." And Joanna's heart shattered anew, because her daughter wasn't just remembering. She was unraveling years of false truths, unlearning the lies stitched into her very identity. And as Lilah trembled, clutching at the blanket with white-knuckled fists, Joanna climbed onto the bed beside her and pulled her close, not forcing touch, but offering it. And to her relief, Lilah didn't flinch, only leaned into her mother's warmth like a child who had wandered through a blizzard and finally found fire again. And for a long time they sat like that, mother and daughter, no words needed, until Lilah broke the silence once more. "I used to hum when he wasn't listening," she whispered, under the blankets, so quiet even I couldn't hear it. And Joanna kissed the top of her head and said, "That song kept you alive." And Lilah closed her eyes again, but this time there were tears on her cheeks and a soft exhale that sounded like relief. And as she drifted back into sleep, Joanna remained beside her, one hand resting on her daughter's chest, as if to promise she would never be pulled away again. And outside, the wind stirred the pine trees like a lullaby, and the stars watched in silence as the girl who had been stolen learned to remember, and the woman who had lost everything began to believe that healing wasn't a destination, but a return dot. It began with a map, one drawn in crayons, smeared and faded, found in the bottom of an old storage box recovered from Matt's property weeks after his arrest. Most of it was meaningless, scribbled circles, stick-figure trees, something resembling a sun. But in the top right corner, carefully printed in a child's unsteady hand, were 3 words: Noah's place, safe. When Detective Rourke showed it to Joanna, her knees buckled. It wasn't just a doodle, it was a memory, a place, and possibly, finally, the truth. For years, they had believed Noah was buried somewhere in the vast thickets behind Matt's property. but search after search yielded nothing. No bones, no clothing, nothing but silence and pines. Until now. A special forensic team, accompanied by dogs and cadaver-trained drones, followed the vague directions sketched out in waxy crayon. It led them 2 miles east of the main cabin, into an overgrown ravine veiled by fallen trees and heavy brush. The dogs stopped at a moss-covered stone wall, half swallowed by earth. Beneath it, buried under layers of carefully packed river rock and a thick sheet of polyethylene, they found it. Small bones, children's shoes, and a tattered red hoodie that Joanna instantly recognized from old photographs. It was Noah's. Joanna fell to her knees at the sight, hands pressed to the earth. She didn't cry. Not this time. The grief was too deep for tears. She had imagined this moment for 13 years, had feared it, longed for it, denied it. But now, as the truth lay before her in the soil, she finally whispered, "You were brave, baby. You kept her safe." And in the days that followed, Lilah drew again. Not flowers, not suns, but Noah, over and over. In one drawing, he was holding her hand beneath a starry sky, humming a song. In another, he was standing between her and a dark figure with long arms. "He sang louder when I got scared," she told the therapist. "He told me to run and not look back." Through flashbacks and fragmented memories, they pieced together what had happened. Noah had confronted Matt during an escape attempt, shielding Lilah as she slipped through the trees. He had distracted their captor long enough for her to hide, long enough to be caught himself. He had sacrificed everything. A small memorial was held at the place where his remains were found. Just family. Just whispers. Just a wind chime hung on an old oak branch, playing soft notes into the mountain air. Lilah placed her drawing of him into the earth before they covered it. "Now he's really free," she said. "He doesn't have to hide anymore." And in her voice was something new. Not just sadness, not just pain, but peace. The morning of the court hearing arrived cloaked in gray mist. The courthouse nestled like a sentinel between 2 wooded ridgelines that had once hidden so many secrets. Now, the truth would be spoken aloud, documented, named, and entered into the record, not just for the sake of justice, but for the restoration of a name, Lilah Kate Elwood. The courtroom was silent as Lilah entered, her small hand tucked inside her mother's. Her hair no longer cropped short, but flowing past her shoulders like it had in those baby pictures that once hung on the refrigerator 13 years ago. She wore a pale blue dress and a hummingbird pin on her collar, a tribute to the song she had once whispered in the dark to remember who she was. Matt Halden, seated at the defense table in his prison uniform, looked at her, but she didn't return his gaze. Her eyes were steady, focused on the judge. She wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't his anymore. As the judge read through the charges and the agreed sentencing, life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, Matt barely flinched. He remained unnervingly still, only reacting when Lilah's voice rose, clear and small, but unbreakable. "You said no one would ever come for me, but someone did." The courtroom hushed. "You told me I'd forget, but I didn't. Not really. I found my way back through dreams and songs. You didn't raise me. You trapped me." She paused, then turned toward him, her voice sharper, older somehow. "You don't get to be my story anymore." And with that, she turned back to the bench, letting silence be the final word. The gavel came down. It was over. But in truth, their story had already shifted days before, when Lilah returned home, not to the house she was taken from, but to a new place, a smaller one by a wide meadow near the old orchard. Joanna had moved there recently, unable to live in the old house with its echoes and unopened doors. Here, they planted new things. Apple trees, lavender. Lilah painted again, but not just memories. She painted the future, a school, a window, a girl with a bird in her palm. And every evening just before sunset, she'd sit by the porch and hum. Not because she had to remember, but because she could finally let go. On one particular evening, a gentle breeze carried her voice across the field, and a dozen hummingbirds fluttered in, dancing through the air like sparks from a rekindled fire. Joanna stepped onto the porch and smiled. "That's your song, isn't it?" she asked. Lilah nodded, her eyes tracing the wings of the birds overhead. "No," she said softly, "it's ours." And in that moment, with the past buried and the wind singing of freedom, they knew this wasn't the end. It was the place where sorrow softened, where healing began. where the song never had to be whispered again. In the end, it wasn't justice that healed them. It wasn't the courtroom sentence or the discovery in the woods. It was a song. A quiet melody, once whispered by a terrified child under a blanket of fear, now sung freely in the open air by a girl who remembered who she was. Noah's bravery, Lilah's survival, Joanna's love. These were the pieces that brought the story full circle. Sometimes, what's lost is never truly gone. It waits for the truth, for a voice, for someone brave enough to listen. If this story moved you, if you believe that truth, no matter how long it takes, always finds its way home, then subscribe to Nest Soul. Here, every story is a path through darkness, toward light. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay curious and stay human.